everybody. So today we're going to talk about how to make a plate. So I'm set up on my wheel. I have a few basic tools, including my bucket of water and a sponge. I've got a couple of ribs, a modeling tool or wooden knife specifically, which I'll be using today as well. And I have about 3 pounds of clay. So this will be enough to make a dinner-sized plate or so. So we'll take a look at that and see what that process looks like today. All right, so the first step that I'm going to do obviously is get centered. So I'm going to go ahead and take my ball of clay. We're going to aim for the middle. And let's see if we can get that centered. Now when you center for making a plate, it's going to be different than when you center for making a bowl or making pretty much any other form, in that you're going to want to center this really wide and really low. So assuming that you want your plate to be however wide, you maybe the width of your bat or however far you want to go out, you have to actually center your clay that far out there. So it does take a lot more clay than you might realize to make a large plate. So make sure you have enough material. 3 pounds will get me about a dinner-sized plate or so. But you want to make certain that you center it wide and low. So you've got to bring that width out as far as you want the foot of your plate to be. So I'm going to start by coning it up. And I'm going to compress it back down. And as I compress it down, I'm going to continue to work that outward and down. Using pressure with my palm. I'm going to kind of bring that out. Okay, so we're just going to make sure that this is basically centered. Kind of a big flat hockey puck really at this point that we're going for. Pay attention to your thickness. You want to keep it fairly even at this point. I'm just kind of walking my sponge out across the form here. Trying to keep it fairly flat. Just bringing that out until I'm happy with that outer edge. I'm going to be refining that a little bit further later anyway, but I just kind of want to get a nice flat place to start from here. So basically once you kind of get that flattened out, the next thing that you're going to want to do is start to really pay attention to your thickness here and think a little bit about how deep you want to go and how much material you need to pull out. So you can check that pretty easily by taking a pin tool and just sticking your pin tool into the plate here, and then you touch the clay with your finger at the base of the pin tool there and pull it out. And so if you look at that, it's going to tell you just how much clay you have, just how thick that is at the moment. And so when you're making a plate, you're going to want to leave enough material that you can trim and still have an appropriate amount for the actual, the thickness of the wall of the plate itself, the floor of the plate. And so what I want to do is go ahead, I'm going to go a little bit deeper here and pull some material out, and I'm going to kind of stop pulling out as I get out about to where this edge is here. What I want to do is kind of carry that material out, and then I'm going to be able to create a rim, and I'm going to be able to adjust and modify that rim, and then we'll kind of take care of what that profile on the plate's going to look like. But we're going to concentrate on kind of getting that floor first. When you're doing this, one of the things that's going to happen, because you're applying all that pressure, you're creating a lot of tension in the particles here within the clay. And because of all that tension that's created by that outward pressure, as the plate dries, there's a real danger of having your plate crack. And one of the things that can help prevent that is, as you're going through this process of creating the plate, you really want to make sure you're compressing this. especially once you get it kind of out into its final shape as far as the floor goes. You can use a rib to compress that, and we'll see what that looks like in just a moment. So let's go ahead and pull some material out from the center. I'm going to go ahead and go in. I'm just going to use my sponge, basically, kind of dive in with my sponge a little bit, get a little more depth there, and then I'm going to carry that outward. Now, one of the things that you also have to be really cautious about here as you do this is you've really got to pay attention to your thickness, because the thing is, when you start here in the middle, so you go ahead and you dive in here, okay? And when you start to get into this and you start to carry that material outward towards the edge, it takes a lot more pressure closer here into the center here than it does as you get farther out. And so as you work your way outward, if you're not really careful, one of the things that tends to happen is that your plate ends up being a lot thicker here and slopes down to thinner here. So pay attention to how level this floor is and try to make sure that as you're pulling outward, you're keeping a consistent thickness from here to here. You want that to be pretty flat. You don't want to have that kind of dome shape, which is, again, kind of a rookie mistake that a lot of people do tend to make, just because of the way this process works when you're doing this pull outward. So I'm going to pull a little more material out. At this point, I'm using my sponge to help keep it wet, and I'm applying pressure with my middle finger primarily as I walk that outward. Okay. Bring that out and start to collect this lip. So one of the things I can do here is start to kind of pinch over this and start to bring that in a little, kind of tighten that in with my fingers, and start to kind of create a little vertical lip here. So what I want to do is create a little rim, and I don't want to flare this out yet. We'll take care of the shape of the plate in a moment. We're not going to quite do that yet. First thing we want to really do is just get our floor situated. Make sure we've got some material out there to work with. And then one of the last things that we're going to do is kind of finish up and deal with that lip. So right now, I want to go ahead and take a rib, nice big wooden rib, and I'm going to smooth out and compress across the floor of my plate. And again, by doing this nice compression, I'm going to help prevent cracking as my plate dries. Now, when you do this and you're using a rib to create this floor across your plate, obviously you're going to get a smooth surface, and that might be exactly what you want. Personally, I often like to still see throwing marks in my work, so more often than not, even after going through and ribbing something out like that, I like to get a little bit wet and then kind of just come back and just reestablish those throwing marks, just because I think it gives it a little more character. Oftentimes, depending upon the glaze you use, you'll be able to see that, and I think it's a little more attractive sometimes to have that there, but that's just a personal choice. All right, next thing I want to do is take a wooden knife, and I'm going to clean up the outside edge of my plate here. Just remove some of that extra clay, kind of tighten that up a little. One of the other considerations you need to keep in mind is where your foot is going to be. And so your foot should be pretty much directly underneath where this rim springs from the floor. We'll talk more about that when we do the trimming as well, but you can kind of preset that a little bit right now just by using that wooden knife and kind of tightening that up a little bit. And so if you can bring that in and clean that edge up, you'll know when it comes time to trim really how much you need to do in terms of how much you need to clean up and how tight you need to come in order to bring yourself to having a foot that's directly underneath where your lip is going to be. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and start to play with this lip a little bit. So what I want to do is go ahead and pull that up. I'm going to do a pull very much like I would if I was pulling the wall on a bowl or some other object. And I'm just going to pull this up and out just a little bit. I'm not going to take it out very steep. I'm just going to kind of do a gentle pull and bring it up. It's already at a decent thickness here. It's not too bad. So I'm not going to have to do a lot of pulling here. But I'm going to go ahead and bring that up just a little. And again, I want to focus on coming upward at this point rather than out. And I'm going going to concentrate on my thickness. Like so. Carefully, you don't dig in too deep with your finger on the inside there. You can always come back. Again, just kind of touch up those throwing marks if you want to. And make sure there's a nice transition down here where you go from the floor of your plate to that little bit of a vertical element. Make sure this lip is nice and rounded and smooth and even at this point. If it's uneven, you may want to cut that down with a pin tool and then smooth it out and clean it up. I'm going to tighten up my outside edge here just a little bit more again. Okay, and so we kind of have a dish at this point, kind of a low, wide dish. So in order to kind of finalize this and really get our plate, I'm going to take another rib, and this is going to be one of the very last things that I do here. I'm going to take my rib, and I'm going to basically lay that lip out to create that, you know, kind of flattened surface. Now, I want to lay it out a little bit, but I don't want to go completely horizontal. When you're firing and everything else, you know, there's a good chance that that can sag a little bit. And so I never go completely flat. I always leave a little bit of spring to it so that even if it does sag a little, it's still going to look appropriate. So we're just going to lay our rib into the wall here. I'm going to support it underneath with my fingers, and I'm supporting underneath there so it won't collapse. And then I'm just going to slowly and gently begin to roll that rib outward until I get a nice gentle angle. And I'm going to back off of my pressure. And at this point, you want to keep your wheel speed pretty slow. If you floor it, there's a good chance that centrifugal force is going to pull that out, and you're going to run into trouble with that falling. Just clean that up a little there as well. And there we have a plate. So at this point, of course, make sure you cut underneath it. If you fail to cut underneath this, you're really going to run into trouble with drying. You've got to make certain that this has an opportunity to release from the bat. Again, just because of the tension that's created from this process, there's a lot of tension on the bottom of that plate, and you can run into problems with etch cracks or other things happening in the bottom here if you're not careful about that. So maintaining state's also going to be really important when you go from here to the next stage. Of course, we'll be trimming this. So when it's time to trim this, you want it to be leather hard, and you want to really kind of take your time getting there and give it an opportunity to kind of evenly set up to that stage. So, you know, it's a really good idea to kind of keep an eye on your plate as it's kind of going through from wet clay to leather hard, and check on it and flip it over at some point so that the foot has an opportunity to kind of stiffen up a little bit. You don't want your lip to get dry and get bone dry and get too hard while the rest of this is still soft. So maintaining a nice, even, consistent state is going to be really important if you're going to be successful with trimming and finishing this out. Okay, so next up, we'll be trimming. All right, guys, so quick tip. After you've thrown your plate and you're letting that set up to leather hard, at some point you're going to want to flip it over to allow the foot to dry and kind of even out, because you do not want the lip to dry too quick. So here's the trick. I'm going to cut it again. I've already cut this. I did that when I first threw it, but I'm going to run the wire under it one more time just to make sure it's nice and loose. And then, rather than trying to pull it off of there, I'm going to take another bat, set it on top, flip, remove that, and I can let that sit. So I'm going to wait for that to be leather hard before I trim. All right, everybody. So we've got our plate, and this has had a chance to sit out for a little while. And it is now at a leather hard state. And what I'm going to do now is go ahead and set this up to trim. So what I want to do is go ahead, flip it over. I'm going to center it on the wheel here. I'm going to go ahead and get it just a little bit wet just to help it stick. And we're going to get that centered here. So again, just kind of bracket it with your fingers, give it a little gentle nudge until you get it to where you think you're about roughly in the middle. And then just make a couple little adjustments right there, little bumps. Okay, once we've got that centered, then I'm going to start by just kind of cleaning up the outer edge. I've got a pretty good idea where I want that foot to be. I'm going to want that to spring up pretty much directly underneath where that change of shape is. So I'm going to begin by just kind of tightening up in here and cleaning up. I want to make sure this is nice and flat and level. So I'm going to go ahead and take my tool and just kind of walk that across as well. And just make sure that this is nice and flat. Especially right out here where I want my foot to be. Alright. So I'm going to go ahead and cut in and establish that foot. Alright, so I want to trim enough material here just to establish my foot ring. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to round that over here into the body a little bit. Still want to create a nice sharp division so that I know where my glaze is going to end. Just kind of clean that up, let that blend in. This is a fairly deep plate, but that is really just kind of your personal choice in terms of the shape and design that you want. And I'm going to go ahead now and kind of come out from the middle and begin to remove and plane some material away. Until I get out to that foot. So here obviously you want to pay attention to your thickness. You don't want to leave the floor of your plate too thick or too thin. I usually try to shoot for about 3/8 of an inch or so. Just plane that out till it's nice and even. Okay. All right. We'll just clean that up a little here. And I like to kind of compress and smooth this out just a little bit to get a nice rounded foot. And there we have it. Be careful picking up the plate. That can kind of mess you up sometimes. If you're not using a bat, just, you can even take your splash pans off if you need to kind of slide it off there gently. If you got a bat, then you can just turn it over and pop that loose. Make sure that you go back and just kind of touch up your lip if you need to. You can take a sponge, and any place that you see evidence from where you stuck it to the bat, just go back and touch that up and clean that up a little bit, because you'll have kind of a little bit of a rough spot there. The other thing that I'd recommend you do is once this is totally bone dry, you can go back with like a Scotch-Brite or a green scrub pad or whatever, and just kind of touch that up. Just give it a little bit of a once over to kind of soften those edges out, and make sure you don't have any extra debris or rough spots on your lip. Now, as far as drying your plate, it's a good idea to dry it upside down so that it dries more evenly. You can also kind of rotate. You can start with the right setup if you want to, but make sure that you're flipping it over at some point so that it'll dry evenly. Again, that'll help you avoid that S-crack in the bottom, which is a common thing that we tend to see in plates if you don't take a few precautions ahead of time. All right, so that's the process. Good luck and have fun making plates.